New York City is full of familiar sounds, distant sirens, music leaking from open windows, fragments of conversations drifting through the streets. These sounds remind us that we live in a city that never truly sleeps. But some sounds remind you of something else. They remind you that you might be living in a building that is alive. Tonight's story is about one of those sounds. My name is John. 6 months ago, after graduating from college, I moved to New York for work. I rented a small studio apartment in an old building in Brooklyn, a 5-story structure built in the 1930s. Thick walls, tall windows, original wooden floors that creaked with every step. On my first night, what struck me most was the silence. After the chaos of the city during the day, the quiet felt unnatural. Until I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. The digital clock on my bedside table read 3:07 a.m. And that was when I heard it. Footsteps. Clear, heavy, perfectly spaced. But they weren't coming from the hallway. They were coming from above, from the rooftop. A few steps, then a brief pause. A few more steps, another pause. It sounded like someone had started descending the stairwell from the roof. The footsteps moved slowly downward, from the roof to the 5th floor, then the 4th, and finally they stopped directly in front of my apartment door on the 3rd floor. They stayed there for a moment. Then they continued, down to the 2nd floor, the 1st floor, and then nothing. The next morning, I tried to explain it away with logic. Maybe a neighbor had been on the roof late at night, maybe the building's maintenance worker. When I asked the superintendent, he looked genuinely confused. "The roof is locked," he said. "No one goes up there. The key's been missing for years." The second night, it happened again. 3:07 a.m. Exactly the same pattern. The third night, the 4th, the 5th, every single night. I've always considered myself a rational person, so I started documenting it. Dates, times, duration. Everything followed a precise pattern. This wasn't pipes. It wasn't the wood expanding. This was deliberate. This was intelligent. Until 1 week later, when I made a mistake that changed my life. At 3:06 a.m., I made a decision. I wanted to know what or who was making that sound. I left my apartment door slightly open and stood behind it in complete darkness, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "3:07. It began. From the rooftop, 3 steps. Silence. 3 more steps. Closer now. The 4th floor. I was barely breathing. I peeked through the narrow gap in the door. The stairwell was pitch black. The lights were off. The footsteps reached my floor. 3 heavy steps stopped right in front of my apartment door. But this time, they didn't stop. Instead, the sound continued. Now it was coming from inside my apartment. From the wooden floor of my own hallway. Something passed through the half-open door and entered my living space. The air turned cold instantly, and a strange smell filled the room. Damp soil, rotting wood, and something sweet, like old rose water. With shaking hands, I flipped the light switch. There was no one there, but the wooden floor just inside the doorway was wet. 2 dark marks, the size of a man's shoes. And the smell, it lingered. After that night, the footsteps stopped. No more sounds on the stairs. But the silence was worse, because now I felt like I wasn't alone. I constantly felt watched. When I sat at my desk, I felt someone standing just behind me, staring at my screen. I woke up in the middle of the night, certain someone was standing in the darkness of my bedroom. Until one evening, I ran into my neighbor in the stairwell, Mrs. Grayson. She lived on the 4th floor, a woman in her 70s, always polite, always talkative. That night, her face was pale. Her eyes were filled with a fear I had never seen before. "You're the new tenant on the 3rd floor, aren't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, John." She stared at me for a long moment, then glanced up the stairs. "At night, do you hear anything?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Footsteps," she whispered, "on the stairs. Every night, at the same time." My throat went dry. 3:07. Her expression changed instantly. She stepped closer and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "Listen to me carefully and never forget this." Her hand was ice cold on my arm. "Whatever you do, never open your door. Not to look, not to prove anything. Let it pass. If you don't open the door, it comes and goes." Then her eyes widened. "But if you open the door, if you show that you recognize it, if you see it, then it knows it's been seen. And when something knows it's been seen, it never leaves." Before I could ask another question, she turned and hurried up the stairs with unnatural speed. That night, I followed her advice. I locked my door, chained it, pushed a heavy chair against it. My breathing was shallow. But this time, the sound was different. The footsteps were softer, careful, like someone walking on their toes. They came from the roof again, but the pauses between each step were longer, as if it was listening. The footsteps reached my floor. They stopped in front of my door. And then they stayed. Not for a minute, not for 5, for 15 full minutes. I stood frozen behind the door, feeling its presence on the other side, the weight in the air, the cold creeping in under the door frame. Then the sound changed. Breathing. But not from behind the door, from above me, from the ceiling of my bedroom. Slow, heavy, exhausted, like something that had walked a very long way. Then a soft scraping sound, like fabric dragging across plaster, moving across the ceiling, from the hallway into the bedroom. No footsteps, no creaks, just the breathing. In the morning, I saw it, a new damp stain on the ceiling above my bed, about the size of a dinner plate, dark in color, smelling of wet soil. The next day, everything fell apart. In the hallway, I overheard the landlord speaking to the superintendent. Yes, Mrs. Grayson moved out 3 days ago. She said she didn't feel safe anymore, said the sounds were getting worse. My blood ran cold. 3 days ago? But I spoke to her last night. She touched my arm. She warned me. If she had moved out 3 days earlier, then who did I speak to? And that's when I remembered her warning. If it knows it's been seen. If it knows it's been seen, it never leaves.
I opened the door and I spoke to it. I moved out shortly after that. I relocated to a different neighborhood, a modern building, concrete walls, laminate floors. But on my first night in the new apartment, I woke up at 3:07 a.m., and from the darkest corner of the room, I heard a whisper, a voice trying to sound like Mrs. Grayson, but deeper, hollow. So the next time you hear something strange in your apartment late at night, before you open the door, ask yourself one question. Do you really want to know what it is? Or would you rather just let it pass?